Good morning everybody, and welcome to this morning's Coffee Cafe. My name is Debbie and I'm one of the local agents that covers Tombstone. Today we're going to be talking about bereavement services and advanced care planning. And today I'm joined on the sofa, as it were, by two lovely guests. So let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have Harriet Nichols. Good morning, Harriet.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, and Harriet is the Advanced Care Lead for Somerset Foundation Trust. And also we have Julia with us. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning, Debbie.
Good morning. And Julia she's got a long title. She's the Community Engagement and Development Manager for Marie Curie in our area. Harriet, let's start with yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do and what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, Debbie. As you said, my job is Advanced Care Planning Lead for Somerset Foundation Trust, which is a bit of a mouthful, not as much of a mouthful as Julia's role. I work in the NHS, so I work across the acute settings like Musgrove Park Hospital, and I work in the community, so with health coaches, health connectors, district nurses, and other village agents, etc., and also with people in their own homes. So work across the county. And my job title, Advanced Care Planning, I'll explain a bit about that. So Advanced Care Planning is a term that we use often in health and social care settings, but it's not a term that everybody is necessarily familiar with. We use other terms that people are probably more familiar with, such as future planning, planning ahead, thinking ahead, planning for your future. So the key word there is plan. And a quote I really like is, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And I think that really summarises it. You've got to put things in place. Planning for your future is about thinking about and talking about, importantly, and perhaps even recording somewhere what is important to you as a person. Who would be your voice if you couldn't talk for yourself? Do you know, do the people around you know what's important to you and what your wishes are? And it's about your legacy, things you want to say, things you want people to know about you. And it's about your wishes and your values now and into the future as well. And those things can change, but it's important to talk about them. It might include choices as well. So it might include choices about where you would want to be cared for, how you would want to be cared for. What treatments you might want to have, or what treatments you might want to refuse to have at some point. It could also be about digital legacy. In this day and age, I think that's something that's really important to people now. You can appoint an executor for your digital legacy in the same way that you can appoint an executor for your will. And that could be anything along the lines of your online banking, online accounts. You might manage your services and things online, your social media accounts, all that kind of stuff that we keep virtually. You can sort that out as well in terms of digital legacy. So it's a whole big picture.
Harry, could I just ask, is that something that we should be considering now, or is that something we wait until we're poorly and maybe the future's not looking so bright, or is it something we should be talking and doing now while we're well?
Yes, Debbie, that's a really good question. Something might trigger those thoughts if you do become unwell, if you get a diagnosis of something, but something else might trigger those thoughts if somebody around you becomes ill or something unexpected happens, and it makes you think, oh, what if that happened to me or my loved one? So yes, absolutely, it's for anybody, and unexpected things, as we know in this day and age particularly, unexpected things can happen. So yes, it's for anybody, but there might be things that trigger those thoughts, and sometimes it's really difficult to start that conversation. Sometimes it's just difficult to have the opportunity, and sometimes you have to be really courageous. If it's difficult for you, you might be thinking it's difficult for people around you to hear it or to want to talk about it. So yeah, sometimes there's a bit of courage needed, but yes, it's for everyone. Okay. And the main thing is that we should talk about it, and that sort of segues nicely into why we're both here. Because I'm working, as part of my role, I work collaboratively with Marie Curie and with Julia in particular. And they're running a couple of projects in the community that Julia's going to tell you about now, which are really relevant to this at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, over to you, Julia.
Julia.
Thank you. that was a very nice lead in, Harriet, I have to say. And our project is called Talk About. And what we're asking people to talk about is what they think they might like, what their wishes might be around the end of their lives. So we are thinking more about, one of the things that we know is going to happen to us is that we are all going to die. And as Harriet said, at the moment, at this time in our lives, when we've got a pandemic and people are dying, we've had these terrible milestones of 100,000 people dying. One of the important things is to know what it is that we want for ourselves, and we would want to know about for our families. So what's important to people? What is it that's important, and how can we support people to have the conversation? So this is what our Talk About project is about. How do we support people to have a conversation and facilitate that conversation about what's really important to them at the end of our lives? And many of us, we'd have made lots of plans throughout our lives. If we've become parents, we make plans about our children, where we're going to give birth, what that's going to be like. We make plans around where we're going to live, our jobs, all sorts of things all the time. But one of the things we're not very good at is making those plans for our death.
It's interesting that you say that. Sorry, Julie, interrupting you, just picking up a point. Fine. But you're so right. When you're going to give birth, when you're going to have a baby, you spend I never thought about it before, but you spend so much time, don't you, planning? You've got your bag packed, you've got your birth plan, everything is there. But I bet none of us hardly ever think about what's going to happen come the end, do we?
No, and it's a difficult thing, isn't it? It's not something that we perhaps in our society are very comfortable about talking about and appreciating. That actually, if we do have those conversations, it does make it easier for our families as well as ourselves. And it's a very difficult subject to broach. I myself had that conversation with my children a couple of Christmases ago, and it was difficult for them. They didn't want to think about their mum dying, and it was quite, it was funny and it was emotional, and we had all of those things happening in that conversation about the things that I would personally like, where I would like to be, and my husband also joined in the conversation. So we managed to have a family conversation about what is it that we want to happen when we get to that stage. And so I think they've got a good understanding of, what I would want at the end of my life. And there are lots of ways that we can do this. And on our Marie Curie website, and I know you've got the link up, there are some really good resources that people can use to help them have those conversations, just to kind of prompt to have those conversations. So I'd urge people to have a look at that, just for some ideas.
It's as you say, it can be a very delicate conversation to have with loved ones, but actually a conversation that you need only to have once. That really important conversation that just needs to be done once, so that
and one of the things I think from we've been having some of these conversations already obviously in Marie Curie, we're an end of life charity. We have these conversations with people, and quite often people will tell us it's quite a relief to have had that conversation. They give you a lovely example of someone that we were supporting who had a number of children, and she hadn't had this conversation with her children. And she talked about to us what she would like at the end of her life. And when we asked the question, so, when you can't look after yourself, what is it that you would like to happen? What would be important to you? And one of the things she said was, I really want to be in the nursing home where my friend is, because I visit her every Sunday, and that is where I want to be. If I can't take care of myself at home, I become too unwell, I would like that to happen. But I haven't had that discussion with my children, and I think they're all expecting me to go and live with one of them, and I don't know how to broach it. So we wrote it all down, and she asked for extra copies when we'd written it all down, the conversation, so that she could give one to each of her children. So they all were really aware of what Mum really wanted. And it just made it easier to start that conversation. So the project that we've got starts in April, but of course what we're doing is trying to have those conversations with people, and what we're doing is using our Marie Curie talk about it companions, we call them, and they're all specially trained volunteers to have those conversations with people.
And do your wishes need to be documented in a legal format, or can you just write them down yourself and keep them somewhere safe after you've had a conversation with family and friends? Is it like
Yeah, Harry.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't have to be legal. There are legal aspects that you can do, but they're separate. An advanced statement is what we're talking about, a living will, however you want to put it. It doesn't have to be legalized in any way. It can just be a conversation, and it can be, more importantly, in Julia's example, brilliantly documented so that other people can see it. They can refer to it in times of stress or distress. Sometimes it's really good to have something concrete, to not just use hearsay. I remember Mum said that, you've got that written down. But no, it's not something that has to be held or witnessed. There are, as I say, different legal aspects that can be. So if you're going into something more specific, an advanced decision to refuse treatment is a legal document, and that needs to be treated such. But that's very specific about certain treatments that you might not want to have. So that's a separate thing. This is what we're talking about, is a more general whole person, what's important to me situation.
Yeah.
And there's sorry.
I was going to say, I just guess from a relative's point of view as well, and personally, actually, I can pick up on this. It does make it a lot easier. When my father passed, he had very specific instructions with regards to his funeral, right down to the last second of what he wanted doing, hymns, where it was to be, and as a family member, my sister and I, we didn't have to think of anything. We didn't have to make any choices, and at that really difficult time, it was great. We didn't need to, because he had already made those choices, and we just followed his wishes. So it was really, really good from that respect.
And Debbie, I think that's a really good point that you've made, that it's a difficult time, and to not have to make hard choices during that period when you know you're just doing what's right by that person and you're not having to think about that, then you can process. And I think that's really a big part of this.
And I would ask Debbie, I'd ask you a question about how did you feel? How did that feel for you? Yes, it made it easier, but how did it feel at the time, and how does it feel now?
It was actually fantastic, because we knew we were doing exactly what he wanted, and there was no indecisive decisions. Would he want this? Shall we do it this way? And also, I could imagine there may have been some conflict of interest between what my ideas of what my dad would have wanted and what my siblings' ideas of what dad would have wanted could have been actually quite different. And that would have caused a bit of a friction at a very, very, very sad time. So actually that aspect, excuse me, was taken away because dad had made all the choices. There were a couple that we both raised an eyebrow at and looked at each other. Okay.
Will be.
But in actual fact, again, that was fantastic, because there was humour, at this time. He was still there. There's still this humour. To this day, I'm not sure why there was one funeral director that he was adamant we weren't to use. I don't know why. But that made light of that was a nice moment in a very sad time when you're struggling yourself and you're dealing with grief, to fulfill his wishes. And that was the main thing, is we were fulfilling what he wanted. So yes, it made it easier, but also it was fulfilling, and it felt good, because we knew exactly we were doing what he wanted for himself, and that was a last loving thing that we could do for him.
Well, that's wonderful.
It was wonderful. It sounds like it was really, it still is really comforting for you.
Oh, it is. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I think on that same sort of vein as well, as a nurse, I've had conversations with people and therefore or thereafter facilitated conversations where if they hadn't talked, we tend to assume what we think our loved ones would want for us as well, even if it's not what we would want. So an example as a nurse, an example would be I had a patient who wanted to have end-of-life care at home. She wanted to be in her own bed and be surrounded by her things as well as her family. But she felt very strongly that that was no good for them, that they wouldn't want her in the house and they wouldn't want to know that that's where she'd spent her last weeks and days. And it took a bit of facilitating for her to have that conversation with her family present. But in doing so, they all went, no, that's exactly what we want. We thought you wanted to go in somewhere else, but we want you here with us. And then she was able to be cared for at home. And that was fulfilling everyone's wants and wishes. So I think that another aspect to it is if we talk about it, we might be pleasantly surprised. And I think that's important.
So Julia, the talk about how does that work? How do we access that? How do I get information on that then?
So we start, as I said, we're starting in April, so that's kind of the launch of the project. We're always happy to talk to people now, and I think you've got our telephone numbers going across the screen and the website for information. So the project doesn't actually start then, but what will happen is there will be public information going out. We will be accepting referrals from healthcare professionals like GPs in our community, and they will be able to refer people into us. Once they've been referred to us, we will make contact, because one of the things we want to make sure, we've already discussed this as a delicate subject. And so we just want to make sure that people are happy to still have the conversation. And if they're happy to go ahead, and in our experience, most people, once they've made that decision, are quite happy to go ahead with it. We will arrange for them to have a conversation with one of our Talk About It companions. And in discussion with them, we'll look at how we record it with them so that they will have a document. And some of that will also go onto the GP or healthcare record, so that our healthcare colleagues are aware of what that person wanted. We do need permission for that, and we don't do any of that without the consent of the person. So every step of the way, we're checking out, is this okay with people? And what we hope is that it will bring people to a place where they share these things with their family, and we're beginning to talk more openly about what we want at the end of our lives, and also to promote the conversation at a much earlier stage. And I guess I'm talking for you, Harriet, in this, but I think I guess that what we would all want is for all of us to be thinking about, if this happened to me or a member of my family, what would I want? Where would I want to be? How is my family going to be impacted by this? And we talk about the legal aspect, and we talk about the financial aspect. We don't always talk about the emotional stuff. And it's really important to do that.
And it's important to normalise it as well.
Yeah, and I'm guessing at the moment, with the current times that we find ourselves in with this pandemic, that we are thinking about it more, because this
Absolutely
is affecting everybody. It's a horrendous situation. So many people have lost loved ones through this horrible virus. And it kind of, it's very forefront in our minds, I feel, at the moment, because it's all around us. Okay, brilliant. Anything else, ladies, that you'd like to add to this? Is the Talk About service, is that just for advanced planning, or is there a bereavement service involved with that as well?
The bereavement service is already up and running, and that's slightly different. And we've got a Somerset bereavement support partnership. So Curie has a partnership with Mind in Somerset, and the partnership has been funded by the Somerset County Council and Community Fund. And that service is for anyone who's experienced a bereavement in the last year or has been impacted since March the 23rd when we had the first lockdown. You don't have to have had someone who's been close to you who has died from COVID-19. That is what the service was set up for, to respond to that. But it's about anyone who's had any bereavement in that time. Come and talk to us. And it might be that you might know someone who's had a bereavement and you think that maybe they could do with a bit of extra help. Do come to us, use the telephone number. If we can't help you right there and then, and we will make sure that we do within the next couple of days. It doesn't take very long. We'll arrange for someone to call you back and have a conversation with you. And we've also got lots of other things in our Marie Curie organisation where we can provide all sorts of different kinds of support. So don't ever hesitate to give us a telephone call on that 0800 3047 412 number, which is a local number, and we'll be talking to people in the southwest. So do give us a call, and bereavement support is available.
Fantastic. Yeah, sometimes it's that first call, isn't it? It's that first step that's always the hardest to make. And once you've made that first step and you speak to somebody as lovely as yourself, Julia, you know, it's positive all the way from then forward, isn't it? If you're speaking to someone.
Yeah, and for some people, it's, you know, they might have that first conversation and feel okay. But I think if people have that first conversation, what they do get from it is that actually that wasn't so bad. Maybe I can go back in a few weeks, or maybe, you know, a few more months down the line, they're actually feeling that they want some support. You can come back to us. And, you know, we've got this great bunch of people who are here ready to support. They're ready to listen, and we can get that support arranged for you. And just be that listening ear sometimes is what we all need, isn't it? Just to sound some things out and see what kind of things that we can do to help.
And I think in a time where we have such limits to our contact with other people as well, it's even more important, it's even more valuable to have that listening ear at the end of the phone.
Yeah, because particularly at the moment we're missing that human contact with each other.
Yeah.
You know, particularly physically as well. You know, if you're going through something like this, you're not able to be the comforter to somebody because we're just not allowed to, and that's very, very difficult, isn't it, at the moment. I was telling you ladies that you know, an absolute first for me, very sadly, that we lost a family member for the virus, and but we attended the funeral via video link, which is the first time ever. Very surreal, but it was very upsetting to not only the circumstances, obviously, but to see the other family members that were there that had to be very distant from each other. There was no comforting. So you're right. You know, this, especially at the moment, what we're all going through, just to pick up the phone and have somebody to talk to is crucial. Really, really crucial at the moment.
Yeah. And I think there's so much pressure. We put pressure on ourselves, and because we have small circles, you're even less likely perhaps to talk to somebody in your small circle of contacts, because you don't want to add to that pressure that you already have amongst yourselves, because there isn't another outlet.
No.
Yeah, and quite often people will say, I can't talk to my sister, brother, dad, mum, daughter, because I don't want to upset them.
Yeah.
I don't want to add to their grief. I don't want to add to their worry. And so having someone who is outside the family can often be really helpful, just to have that confidential space where you can talk about the things that you need to share. And, you know, sometimes it can be almost, I wouldn't quite use the word pleasure, but sometimes it's really nice to talk about the person that you've lost.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, sometimes, and you can practice talking about them and have that reconnection. That reconnection again, which will be different, but it is that reconnection. And quite often people will say, it's really nice just to talk about my dad.
Yes, because family and friends don't want to talk to you about it in fear of upsetting you. They don't like to mention the family member or whoever it is you've lost. And you're quite right, Julia. You actually do, because you want to remember, you want to keep talking about them because they're still very much part of your life. So, yeah, I totally agree with that. We've got a comment here from Sarah. I just read what she said. And she said, I think if you want your body to go for medical research, I think you have to have it in writing, and it might save arguments. Similar to if you wanted your organs donated, etc. She says she thinks you have to make sure it was better in writing. So that's an interesting one.
Yes, Sarah, that is interesting. And I think you're right. I think that does have to go in writing, and it has to be, even in writing, it has to be shared in all the right places so that at the right moment that can be actioned for that person. Because if it's not seen somewhere at the right time, then it can be missed as well. So you're absolutely right. I think with organ donation now, it's opt out. I think you automatically are opted in now, and it's an opt-out process. But certainly with medical research, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean that I think that's a conversation a lot of us have. Myself and my family, my children. We've had the conversation about donor. They all know my wishes. They also all raise an eyebrow when I tell them what songs that Mum wants at the funeral. They're like, oh, really? Chrissy, who's one of our village agents, has put a comment on saying that she's had advanced care plan for a couple of years now, because you never know when it's going to happen, and that's key, isn't it? That's the important thing, is to think about it today, do it today, because we're very good at putting everything off till tomorrow, aren't we? We'll do it tomorrow, it's not going to happen to me. So so start having those conversations if we can. How do you start that conversation? Is there any way, any tips, or any nice sort of conversation starters that you can help us with to have those conversations with family members?
I think it really depends on the situation. Sometimes people give you cues because they might say, I'm worried about who's going to look after the dog if something happens to me. It's what's important to people, so they'll give you a cue, and that's a nice introduction to start talking about it, or what would you like to happen, and it broadens into other things. You can talk really simply as well. You can talk about bucket lists. What would be on your bucket list, and things like that. It's just talking about the future and what's important, and then it can lead on from there. Sometimes it's talking in an example. Often people will say what happened to their relative or their neighbour or their friend whose mum died, and they'll say, gosh, it happened really quickly, and they didn't know what to do about all of her things that she had, and that will trigger a conversation. So more often than not, we'll have cues. And as I think Julia said already, it's surprising how many people are keen to talk about it, but don't have the opportunity, or don't feel they have the opportunity to start that conversation. So the more we normalise it, and the more we look for those cues and talk about things, the more prolific that conversation will become, and it will become really natural, hopefully.
Yeah, and I'm guessing also it's not just for the older people. Young people should be having these conversations. I think they tend to forget or get overlooked, because when you're young, you think you're invincible. But actually, it's really important for, my children are all in their 20s, and we've had slight conversations, not some really in-depth conversations. So perhaps actually that's something that I should be talking to them about, because it's just as important for them. If something should happen to them, that I know. Yes. They all know about me, because they see me as old mum, but for I need to be having those conversations with them. So again, I would encourage anybody that of younger age that think about it. It's not something you need to dwell on all the time. As we said, it's just one conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. It doesn't have to be the be all and end all of conversations, but it's just putting it in there and making it part of normal life, that we know what our wishes are. And I think it's important to say as well that they can change, and that's okay. So you can write it all down, and then it can all be different, and you can rewrite it. It doesn't matter. It's just important in that moment that is shared.
And I think that's really important as well, that you can, as an important point, once it's done, it's not set in stone. You can review it, you can change your mind, circumstances change, things become different. But again, it comes back to thinking about all these plans that we make, and actually this is one thing that we we don't actually think about, you know, and we do think about in other parts of our life, but we're not thinking about planning for it now. If you've got young children, you might be thinking, you know, what happens to me? And you might have had those conversations if something happens to us as parents.
Yeah.
How are our children cared for? But we're still not always thinking about what we want as adults and how we have those conversations with people. And I think there's so much planning that we do, but this is one area that we're not great at. And in the end, it's about the person, the human being, our humanity, and who we are. That's what it's about.
Yeah. And Debbie, you mentioned your children and that sort of generation. There's all sorts of resources out there for people who are younger, who are more likely to use digital formats for doing things. And there's loads of resources for people they can record themselves, they can make little videos, they can do all sorts of things to put those wishes in place. And I said earlier about digital legacy as well, so that their accounts are sorted, their online profile is all in hand. And I think when you talk to, because I've got older teens as well, and I do talk to them about that side of things and say, you know, what would you want people to have access to if you couldn't? And what would you want me to see or not see?
Yeah.
So these things are there's ways of sort of segueing into conversation about it that's relevant to people at whatever time of life they're in.
Sure. Well, ladies, we could talk for ages, couldn't we? We could go on and on and on and on and on. We have touched on it slightly this morning, so I hope that's given everyone that's watching either now or on catch up later on some useful information. The telephone numbers are all going across the screen. If you are watching this on catch up and you've got a question, put it in the comments and we will answer it when we can. So thank you, ladies. I think we've come to a natural end, and I'll say goodbye to everybody live. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Okay.